Good afternoon, everybody. This is Tobias. So today I wanted to give you guys a little walkthrough of this effect that I saw in the Doctor Strange trailer for the new movie coming out. This little summoning of sort of fireball kind of stuff going on. Thought it was kind of cool. I thought it would be an interesting effect to try to show you guys how to do quickly. I'm going to give you a couple of caveats up front because I got some really good feedback the last time I did one of these. So a couple things. One, the process that I'm showing you is just how to do a setup, like how to get to the general setup of the effect. I'm not showing you how to get the final production result that you're going to see on the large screen. That's up to you as the user. I'm just showing you how to get there. And as far as the second point, rendering, I'm not going to set this up for rendering per se because there's just too many ways to go about that, whether inside of Houdini or third-party render engines. I'm going to show you how to get the setup going, and then you can decide how you want to, how you render that output yourself. But rendering, as we all know, in the visual effects field, can take quite a bit of time and all that stuff. So I'm trying to do these as a quick little setup for you. Now I have no idea how long this video is going to take. I will try to speed it along, but not make it too, too difficult to understand. Third caveat, in my setup of this effect, I would say that the end result is probably more for the intermediate level Houdini user, but don't let that scare you. The beauty of video is that you can pause, rewind, take a look at things, and of course you can always ask questions in the comments. I'm happy to answer them, provided that you're polite and not rude. I'm happy to help where I can. Okay, so let's get started. So you saw the screenshot there. You can look this up on YouTube and just find where in the trailer you see this kind of effect. And if you watch it play out, it's kind of like a geometric, suggested shape with these sort of branching smoke trails here and these sort of like little rock fire things going on. I'm horrible at descriptions, but anyway, I thought it'd be kind of a cool effect to kind of show you guys. So I did a quick little, let me get rid of that outline there, sort of setup of how you could go about getting in the ballpark of that. Now this is viewport, this is not render, so try not to be too critical of it. But I'm going to show you how to go about getting, in the vicinity of what you need to do to get you on the path, I guess would be a good way to say it. So what I have here is in Houdini, of course. I'm going to show you, I'm going to walk you through the notes of what I did and the actual settings and explain why I did them. So this video may be a little on the longer side. If you're okay with that, then that's great. If not, then go watch something else, I guess. But anyway, here we go. So Doctor Strange Fireball Summoning. We just have the main effect setup and a simple little background and a light because it's backlit, and then I just have a little bit of ambient light here. And we're just going to take a look at this. Let me just reorient this. Alright, to get where we need to get. Okay, now I'm going to show you, I'm going to walk you through the entire process here of how this is done. So here we go. We're going to dive inside, and I've gone ahead and broken this up into the little areas of what is actually happening. So a good thing to do when you're looking at an effect is try to break it down in sort of, large ideas to small ideas, or even specific types of effects, and sort of compartmentalize them if you can. So in the effect, we can see, whoops, sorry, that's off screen. That is actually the trailer that you heard there for a second. But you can see that we have these little fireballs here. And then we also have this sort of smoky geometric shape. You can sort of see it if you were to sort of draw lines in there. You can sort of see it in the icosahedron shape in there. Suggested when you're watching it. So it helps to break that apart and build that into separate pieces. So that's the way I approached it. You can do it differently if you want. This is just a suggestion. It's not the end-all be-all, of course, as is nothing in visual effects. But let's go a little bit piece by piece here. Okay, so let me reorganize my window here. And here we go. We're just going to start with the fireballs. Okay, so we'll go one by one here. We'll just put this on the headlight so we can see what's going on. A simple sphere. Right, let's do this, the wire shaded. And, whoops. Alright, so we have just a simple sphere that we've set to polygon. And set the frequency to 24 because we wanted a lot of subdivision on this. And the reason why is because when we go into the next step, we want to create an attribute noise, which is going to break up the shape a bit. And you can use the attribute noise node to do that, and have the noise occur on the p-value, which is the position, right? And quick little tip here: if you just do noise along vector and set that to p as well, it'll maintain the displacement, if you will, or the disruption, if you will, in a way that doesn't necessarily break the polygons and intersect them and all that kind of stuff. So just a quick little thing there. And then just sort of dial in the value that you want based on the effect that you're trying to go for. Now in my case, I just chose a simplex noise and made the noise down to a smaller value just based on what I saw in the photo. Alright, so I'm just looking at these little features here, sort of basic, right? And then I'm also animating this because they do animate over time. So that's in this animation section, so you just check the animation noise. Now I should point out that the first, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, I'm sorry, 1, 2. Yes, the first three. Yes, the first three noise types, fast, sparse, convolution, and alligator, do not have the ability to have them animated over time. You would have to sort of manually do expressions in the offset to make that work. That's a little bit beyond the scope of this video. I'm going to change this back to what I had it as simplex, and I can use the inbuilt animation noise, and I'm setting my pulse duration to 2, and if you look at the help for that, it's just when animated noise is on, the controls the rate of change in the noise pattern, right? So a higher number is going to be slower. So as I play this, I'm getting that kind of effect, which is fine. That's fine for what I want. And I did experiment with some of this warping, this accumulated lattice warping, gradient warping, but I wasn't able to get a result that I actually enjoyed in this effect, so I'm going to forego that. Don't need any post-processing in this. And immediately after that, we're going to do a measure curvature. Now the reason why that we're doing this is because if we look at the photo or the video, if you will, you can see that there's emission happening based on the curvature, right? So there's like a core that's emitting hot stuff, right? And we could sort of cheat that, or I wouldn't say cheat, but maybe set it up for a future process down the line by having a curvature in there. Now this is the labs curvature that is in the SideFX labs that you do have to install manually when you do your Houdini install, so be sure to do that, and you'll have access to this node. Measure curvature, and we can do, this is basically the default settings that I have, and I just tweaked the intensity of the blur amount, and I also adjusted the remap range here because I wanted to make sure that my colors looked a certain way. And there you go. So it's mostly the default that's there, with the exception of some of these adjustments here. And that's it for the little fireball shape, right? And then we're going to get into sort of the main shape of the effect. So if you could imagine, if you will, if you were sort of draw a line, through these shapes, you would probably arrive at sort of a platonic shape, which is probably more along the lines of an icosahedron, which is what I kind of sort of saw in the video. So to give you an idea of that, here's what we got. Right, so we have this platonic shape of an icosahedron. So that's like the major form, if you will. I don't know if you're into the drawing or traditional arts, but the idea is that you work from big shapes, large forms, to small details, right? So you try to figure it out based on, large to small, right? So there's the main shape of the effect, and then what I did is based on the effect that I saw. Is I knew that I needed these lines, right? Because that's where. Let me bring back the video here. One moment. So yeah, if you look at the effect again, you see these lines sort of hinted, right? So we'll do that by converting that to a line, and then I'm going to resample that so that I get some extra detail. If you can see these little blue dots there, you see what I'm talking about. It's probably hard to see in the video. But that gives us more resolution in the shapes. And then what I'm doing is I'm copying that, and I am using some expressions here. So here I'll slow down and sort of explain what I'm doing here. So I've made a second copy, and I've made the scale 1.5 times the original source, which is being fed in here. And then I'm simply using a rotate expression here that is 1 minus the frame times 2, right? So what happens is you get kind of like this thing going on here, right, where it's rotating as it goes over time. That's what I wanted the duplication to do. And from there, I am adding another attribute noise to create some randomization along these points here. Now, if I hadn't done this resample here that gave me more resolution than the lines, you wouldn't be seeing anything happen here. So that's why I use the resample, just to sort of get that detail. And now, when we look at this, we just sort of have like a base shape that's going on, which is what I want. And I should point out that much like the fireball, I am using a very simple noise pattern that I'm animating over time, and my speed of that animation is controlled by this pulse duration. And I'm again doing the noise along vector of the position of the incoming geometry, so I don't get wild and crazy transformations of all the different points. Okay, and then from there, what I'm doing is I'm further transforming this because I wanted to have it start from a very small shape over time and grow based on the length of the timeline, and also rotate. Right, so the whole thing is rotating over time. So here's a cool little trick that I encourage you to use. Okay, there we go. So here's something that you should probably take note of. That's a really handy effect. You could easily keyframe this, right? So you can go to frame 1 and say, oh, this uniform scale is 0, and then go to the end and say it's, what is it here, 1. Okay, so it's going to be 1 at the end of the thing. And say, in my case, I'm doing 120 frames, but here's something that happens often in the real world, I guess, is you'll work on a shot, and whoever you're working with, your boss or your creative director or your whoever comes back to you and says, cool, great, that looks great, but we need it to be 72 frames, or we need it to be 160 frames, or so forth. And it's like, oh man, now we got to go back into all these different nodes where we might have had some animation and edit all that. And one thing you can do to help yourself in that is use a simple expression, which I'm showing here. So if you do the current frame, which is this $FF, and multiply that by, in this case it's 1. So in my case, I wanted, by the end of whatever this animation was, however long it was, the uniform scale was going to go from basically nothing to its full size, whatever I wanted it to be. Now this could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 3, it could be 4, whatever you want it to be. But then you divide that by the the variable called $fend, and what that does in Houdini is it just reads whatever this last frame number is, right? So if your boss comes back to you and says, hey, can you make that 320 frames, you could just change the timeline, and you don't have to keyframe anything. It just automatically procedurally animates to fit that timeline. So if they say, oh, we like everything about the effect, but it's too long or it's too short, you can just go back and change just down here the frame length and not have to re-keyframe anything. So this is a good expression. I would recommend that you write that down, put it in a little notebook or text file somewhere. You'll probably end up using that kind of trick a lot of times. So yeah, that's what we did there, just to transform it over time. And then what I did is I knew that based on the shape that I have here, right? So now I have the shape, and I want these fireballs that I made are going to appear on some of these points and sort of move along with it. So what I need to do is I need to make a selection of some of the points, and you can see by this, I don't know how well you can see that, but these orange points here. Oh, I'm sorry. You may not be able to see that well. Let me increase those real quick. I'll be right back. All right, I didn't want you to sit there and watch me do that. So yeah, I just went into the display settings and just adjusted this point marker size here and the guide sizes under the guides tab. All right, so now you can see that the orange dots are my selection that I've made in this group by range, and all I've done here is just set it to points, and I've made a range 1 of 30 points. So if we look at all the points that are available to us, you can see all the blue dots there are all the points of the geometry that we're playing with, and I just want 1 of every 30, just some arbitrary number. It could be whatever you want. And then I'm gonna name this node here. I call this fireball points, and in the group name I just use the variable $OS so that it reads whatever I've called this, right? And then now we're getting into a little bit more intermediate stuff. I'm going to feed this into a wrangle, and this is some simple code, so don't be too intimidated. And you won't be able to see anything while you're doing this, but what I wanted to do, and I'll show you this partly when it's all done. Okay, so the end result is that we're getting these little sort of fireball rocks, right? This little geo that's happening there. But what I wanted to do is be able to control the randomization of the scale throughout the points that I had selected. So I like to have a little bit of control, some art directability, if you will, of what's happening. So anyway, I'll walk you through this. This is just a simple attribute wrangle, and I've called it fireball scale ramp. And what I'm doing here is I'm just taking the variable that's already available in Houdini called @pscale, which is a point variable, and I'm just making that equal to this channel ramp that I've made called scale remap. And what I'm remapping here is just a random selection of the point number of the incoming group, right? And in my case, for some of you that are eagle-eyed, you probably noticed this already, but we have a group name of fireball points, and I did not set it to fireball points. But so that will do that, and what that'll do is that will allow me to get back to this, have this selected. Once I hit this little create spare parameters button, it'll give me this graph, this ramp, if you will. And now what I can do is from 0 to 1 through my selection of points that I have in my group, I can sort of randomize the distribution of the scale in a more sort of organic fashion, right? So I have further control over what's happening. So some of those points you can see here are really, really tiny, but if I want those to be not so small, I can do something like that, and I can make this as complex as I want. So again, just giving the user some control. And if I might have run across some intersecting geometry, that's something I can mitigate by sort of like controlling the size of things, at the upper end of the spectrum or not. So anyway, it gives me a more hands-on way to manage the distribution of the scale that's happening, rather than just letting the quote-unquote math under the hood dictate what's happening to me. So again, here's another good one. Just probably write that down somewhere and save it in a text file or something. This is something you'll probably find handy quite a bit in a lot of different projects, but a super simple way to handle the scale of points that you're feeding into something like a copy to points. Now, little caveat here, in the next step I did use a third-party tool called MOPS, which is short for Motion Operators. This is a free tool that is designed specifically for Houdini. There is a commercial version, which I have to say I am a full commercial user of this product, but you can do what I'm doing here for free. And the reason why I'm using this as opposed to doing it sort of a native Houdini way is, with no offense intended, the thing that I want to do here is randomize the orientation, and doing that in Houdini natively, you can do that with wrangles and attribute randomization, but it's a little complicated, not necessarily artist friendly quite yet. So this tool here is actually much more user friendly for that kind of thing. So all I'm doing here is I'm just taking the points that I'm feeding into it. So my selection, these fireball points, which you can't see here, but it would be these orange dots that you see here. And over time, again, I'm using an expression based on the timeline. Here we go. So for every frame, I'm just taking the degree, 360 divided by however long my frame is, my animation timeline is. So again, I'm not keyframing anything here. This is just an expression, and I'm just in these other fields here. All I've done is I've copied this parameter here, and I've pasted it into these fields, and you can see it's just a channel reference. So it's taking the negative value, and what it's doing is it's going to cause these points to rotate on their orientation as the timeline progresses. And the result of that is what you're going to see here. Let me turn this off. So as this thing grows, we have some fireball rocks kind of thing, and they're all rotating randomly, very slowly, mind you, but they're doing it over the course of the animation timeline. Alright, and like I said, if your boss comes back to you and says, great, it's too long, it's too short, whatever, change it, you don't have to go hunt down any of these nodes. You can just simply change the number down here in the timeline, and everything will update automatically for you, or automagically, as I would like to say. And what I've done here in the last step of this is I've created a color node, and what I'm doing is I'm using this attribute that came from this handy little labs node, this convexity that was created based on the curvature of the shape that we have, and then I've remapped it to black, red, and a bright yellow. And you can see here as I adjust these sliders, I can control the color, and what that's doing in the end is it's giving me this color variable, or CD, that I can feed into either the native render in Houdini, so Mantra or Karma, whatever you want to use, but also most third-party render engines like RenderMan and Redshift and so forth are able to read that attribute. So when we do the final stage of our little fireball rocks here, that data is being carried into it. So we have CD and concavity and convexity, which these can be further used in some material setup. So it's a good thing to have, and then we can reference this output later on. And again, I caveated this video with, I'm not going to set up a render situation for you, but I'm just showing you how to do the setup so that you can empower yourself to do the thing that you need to do later on when you are setting up your render. So there we go. So we've got our little fireball rocks set up based on our geometry, and it has this sort of animated growth, which if you watch the trailer, you see that that is exactly what, not exactly, but similar to what kind of happens in the effect. Okay, and what we're going to do next now is we're going to take this shape, what we have here. Okay, so this source here, which is basically just these distorted lines, and now we're going to work on the smoke aspect. So let me go back to this screenshot so we can reorient ourselves to what we're doing. And I lost my screenshot. That's weird. Hold on just a moment. Let me get that back for you guys. Okay, we're back. I don't know what happened there, but it just kind of disappeared. Okay, so now we're going to take these lines and we're going to turn them into basically a source shape for a pyro simulation, or a smoke simulation, to create this kind of effect. Now it's not going to be totally exact because you're going to have to sort of tweak the settings as you see fit and dial it in as the way you wish, but I'm going to show you how to do it. So here we go. We're going to start off where we left off with these line shapes. So we're going to branch off, and now we're going to work into this whole other section, which is relatively small for our smoke effects, right? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a carve based on this, and the reason why is because in the video, if you watch it, you'll see that it looks like the lines are sort of disappearing or growing in various ways, and the thing that came to mind for me was the Carve Node, and again I'm using, in this case, a slightly more complex expression, but I decided that in my particular rendition of this effect I wanted everything to grow till about maybe halfway through my timeline, which I have 120 frames, and I decided that somewhere around 60 frames I wanted things to start, eating itself up and disappearing. So what I did is I just used the carve first U, and I just wrote a simple if expression, and all this does is it says, I'll walk you through this, it says for the current frame, if it is greater than 60, so as soon as we go past 60 frames, you're going to take the current frame minus 60, because we've already gone 60 frames, so we don't want to start there, and multiply that by 1 divided by 60, because that's where I'm starting the effect of this eating away. And as time goes on, what's going to happen is, you'll see we start at 0 here, and as we advance in the frame, it's going to gradually work its way up to the full value of 1. And we'll see when we get to the end of our frame, our timeline, it's gonna be that full value, right? So there we go. So that's what that expression does. Now this is a little bit more cumbersome because it doesn't use the $f end in this equation, and I'm sure some of you out there that are quite a bit smarter than I am could probably figure out a better way to write this expression, and that's great. If you feel like sharing it, that'd be wonderful. In this case, I would just say, for the rest of us, wherever you decide you want the effect to start, where you're starting to eat away at these lines, you just pick that frame number and just make sure you substitute that number in this expression if you want it all to work correctly, because otherwise you won't really get a 0 to 1 value in this. Now that I will say that I'm aware that there's multiple ways to write this kind of thing, and you could do various things like a fit expression or a fit 01 and do all that. This is just the way that I just did it because that's the way it happened in my mind, so there you have it. It's not the best solution, but it works. Okay, so then we're taking that and we're feeding that into a sweep node, and again I'm gonna walk you through what I did here. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating actual geometry, and I think it might help if I actually disable this background. Let me go back in here. Sorry, I was just doing that for visualization purpose. Alright, so we have this wiring shape that I'm going to create some geometry on, and the reason why I'm doing that is because I'm going to use this geometry to be a source for the the smoke simulation that's coming soon. So here we do surface shape of round tube. By default, it's going to be second input cross section, so you're going to get this error. So you're going to have to change that to round tube at least. And I've changed, let me explain what I'm doing here. Because this shape is going from basically kind of this little dot up to a larger shape, if I were to just put my target radius in here, which I initially started with 0.03, what would happen is that when it was really small like this, it would be really thick. It would be like this big sort of like ball of rubber bands, and that would look kind of stupid, to be honest with you, when it comes to the Pyro simulation. So what I've done is I've taken the value that I wanted, and again I'm using the $FN, which is the frame range, and I'm just taking the value divided by the frame range. So as the timeline progresses, it's sort of automatically adjusting the radius based on how big it's getting. So it's kind of, I guess the easiest way to say this is maintaining a sort of a uniform radius based on its overall scale. That's what that expression is doing. So again, this is probably something you want to take note of, write down in the text file somewhere. One of these things that you'll find yourself using over and over and over again. This $and frame end is a kind of a magical way to handle some of these things. And again, no keyframes. I did put end caps on here to grid, and then I applied the scale along the curve because, let me get to a better frame here. Alright, so you see these kind of squigglies, wigglies. The reason why I wanted to do that is because in the reference photo, we don't really have just straight, radius, like a uniform thickness along the lines, if you will. They do change a little bit. They kind of taper in various spots, and that matters when you're doing a Pyrosource. So we just make our lives easier by doing apply a scale along curve, and that way we can sort of just dial in how we want that to look as we're feeding it in to the next step, which is going to be the Pyrosource. Now we're taking this geometry, and what we're doing is the Pyrosource is actually converting this to scattered points, right? So as you can see here, the mode is surface scatter because it's geometry, and my particle separation here is actually based on the division size of the Pyro solver, which is coming next in a couple of steps. That way I don't have to keep going back and typing in values. So the way that works is you just copy, ignore this field here. I'm just using this as an example. Copy parameter, and then you go to the field, your target field, and do paste relative reference. And that way you don't have to keep going back and typing all that stuff. Now, I think by default, this Pyrosource comes in with a bunch of attributes. I knew that I was just going to do smoke, so what I did is I just cleared everything, and then I just added 1, and I knew that I was only going to be using density, and I just upped the scale to 2, and that was it. That's all I did. And then I brought it into the volume rasterize attributes, so I'm getting an actual rasterization of volume, as the note implies, of this density attribute, which again I'm using my voxel size based on the Pyro solver's division size, so I don't have to keep typing that in later on if I decide to change it, which is really important for iterating through looks. Okay, so once we get to the Pyro solver, it's a good idea to be at frame 1. If you did what I just did, and you happen to be somewhere way down the timeline, and you're like, oh no, it's going to start cooking the thing, you can just hit escape and then just go to frame 1, and then we don't have to wait around for it. So what I did here is first of all, I went into the setup where the voxel size, this is the thing that's driving the voxel size here and the particle separation here. So all I did was copy this parameter and paste it into those other 2 fields there, and all of this is basically default here on this tab. And as far as the sourcing is concerned, again, this comes in with multiple source volumes that it's going to read. Just for the sake of simplicity, I just cleared everything out and I added 1 and changed my source volume to the density, and my target was density, and my source scale I wasn't going to change at all. So this is just a factor of whatever's coming in. So if you recall, my Pyrosource was scale of 2, and it's just going to leave it at 2 because it's multiplying it by 1. There are no collisions. I'm not really messing with fields too much other than dissipation. I did about 4 or 5 iterations of this simulation, and I settled on this dissipation value of 0.01. And this is basically how fast the smoke is dissipating into the air, where it disappears. And that's it for that. And then as far as the shape is concerned, I used Buoyancy. This is actually the default. Disturbance, I did mess around with quite a bit. I brought this down quite a bit because what happens if you have, I think the default value is 0.5. What happens is you get like this really sort of like popcorny, I don't know how to describe it. It's sort of like a popcorny, poofy kind of disturbance in the smoke. And disturbance is good, but I think a very small value is a good idea. I also changed this from block-based to continuous, and what that it's how it's processing the random vectors, right? I decided after doing a couple of iterations that the continuous method worked better for what I was trying to do, and threshold field density, because that's what I'm bringing in, and then the same, sort of just carrying it through with turbulence and shredding, just modifying these values, basically seasoning to taste, if you will. So yeah, just sort of play around with these. The most visual thing you're going to see is the intensity of the setting, so disturbance, turbulence, shredding, and then sizing is where you're going to see a lot. And in any case where you're seeing roughness as an option, that has a really significant effect as well. So in my case, I just wanted a sort of, wispy sort of disruptive effect to the smoke. And then what I did then is I just created a cache, and you can see here, okay, so I did 5 versions before I sort of settled on, okay, I'm ready to record this video. So and they sort of range from not so great to acceptable. Let's see what's going on here. Just trying to show you different values here. Let me pause this real quick. Okay, yeah, that actually just loaded pretty quick after I hit pause. So yeah, I tried a couple of different variations here, and let me go back and turn this back on again so we can see a little bit of separation, so you guys can see better what's going on. So I think that was my very first attempt, and then I just cached a couple of different examples as I was tweaking settings. That was one of my sort of miserable failures, and I kind of came upon, I think, this last one, which seemed okay to me, when it was all playing through. So yeah, like, it's not an identical match, but if we look at the reference shot, we can see that we do have like these sort of lines that are happening here for the pyro. And because we did the carving up here, as you see, the geometry that's driving this pyro is disappearing over time. So that oops, I hit the wrong one. The smoke itself is also going to disappear over time. And I think it's because I'm recording this video that it's sort of like taking a little time to load here. So I apologize for that. But you can sort of see the effect that's happening here. And then once I cache that, just for visualization purposes, I just put this into a pyro bake volume. And did I change the density? I did. Okay, so what I did here is I didn't want to see that little sort of dot of the source at the very beginning of the effect. I wanted to sort of fade in over time. And yeah, I really think it's because I'm recording this video that it's starting to get a little choppy here. But again, here's another expression, and again we're using $FN, which is the length of the timeline to keep us from having to do keyframes. And I'm just saying I want this density to be multiplied by 2, which is this value here, by the time you reach the end of the timeline, please. And then do that by the beginning of the frame all the way to the end, the timeline I should say. So you can see by the time it gets to the end, it's increasing the density. So we're getting that sort of fade in effect over time. And now that we have that, just like the pyro rocks that we had, we have let me get to a better frame here. We have this baked cache here of the smoke that is available to us outside of this network. Again, we could bring this into Mantra, Karma, or a third-party render, whatever we want to do. That's fine. But that's why we're doing it this way, where we have, these outputs here. So we could tap into these later on. And just for the sake of visualization, we'll just bring in a quick merge here, and we can see how they come together. And these little rocks are actually following the shape of the, sort of a large icosahedron shape. So let me get back to the lighting here and turn this back off to smooth shaded. And this, okay, there we go. So I'm going to pause right here. I'm going to do a quick little play blast so you guys can see what the actual playthrough looks like, and I'll be right back. Okay, so the playback finished, or play blast I should say. It did take a couple of minutes, and here we go. So in the end, it's basically in effect inspired by what you saw there, and I hope that you could see how easy it is to set up a similar kind of thing in Houdini, and just by trying to break down the main concepts of the shot. So we have our main form of the effect, and then the different elements that we want to build, and then we just sort of bring them all together. Yeah, so this video we're approaching about 45 minutes, but I think it was important to sort of take the time to walk you through the different little elements. And again, like I said in the beginning of the video, the caveat was I was going to show you how to do the basic setup. I'm not going to walk you through the rendering of it and all of that kind of stuff, but all of the attributes that we created, for the color and so forth, these are going to transfer into your render engine of choice, so that you can use them. So this red color can be used for an emission source based on the red value, and so forth and so forth and so forth. Right, so there you go. There's just a quick way to do it, and I hope you guys found some value in some of the things that I showed you today. And I encourage you to try things on your own. And by all means, if you have suggestions as to some better ways to do some of this, please do share in the comments. It's always good for artists to help other artists doing these kinds of things, because these can be kind of complex, but at the same time, often not as complex as you think they are. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time. I hope you guys have a good night. We'll see you next time.